Hello my sweet friends, welcome back to another video. I'm super excited to be spending this time with you. I've got my coffee, I've got my pile of books, I've got my book journal, and we're going to talk about all the books that I read in February, anyway, you know what I mean. And I also thought it would be fun to have a look at my TBR pile, like my February TBR that I created, and compare it to the pile of books that I actually read. I actually posted a little photo on my book Instagram. I'll have that linked down below and I'll put it on the screen for you guys. If you don't follow that, I definitely recommend it if you want to see more of what I'm reading and keep up to date with what I'm reading in real time. But yeah, I posted a little photo of my TBR, and I'm not gonna lie, I barely ever stick to my TBR piles. This month I didn't get through every one of them, but I read a fair few and I'm kind of proud of myself. This was the pile that I created for my TBR. These were the books that I was hoping to get through in February, and I managed to read these three. I did not read these. I have started this. I'm actually I think just over halfway through this book and I'm loving it so far, but I obviously haven't finished it, so I won't be going through it today. But these two I just didn't touch. I just wasn't in the mood for them, which is fine, but I did read a bunch of other books, so we can talk about those today. I ended up reading 5 physical books, and then I read 6 on the Kindle app on my iPad/my phone. I kind of go between my iPad and my phone. Like if I'm out somewhere and I just have a bit of time to spare, I'll often read on the Kindle app on my phone, which I absolutely love. I kind of wanted to be more intentional with using my Kindle app this past month because I wanted to kind of pretend like I had a Kindle and see whether I would actually use it or not, and I really enjoyed it. So I think a Kindle is something that I am going to invest in probably in the near future. I think I'm just going to put it on my birthday list and cross my fingers. But I'll keep you guys updated with that. But let's start off with the physical books that I read this month. Starting off with Again But Better by Riccio. I think this was a part of a reading vlog that I did, so I think I've already talked about this a little bit. If you don't know, the author of this book is actually a booktuber, which is super cool. I thrifted this and I didn't know that at the time, but Christine was actually one of the first booktubers that I ever watched back in high school, so that is super cool to read one of her books. As for the book itself, I ended up giving it 3 stars. I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it. What is even the main girl's name? I literally can't remember. We have Shane, who is a college student, and she ends up traveling to London to do a semester abroad. Her parents think she's doing like a pre-med program, but she's actually doing like a creative writing program. She doesn't have a whole lot of friends. She feels like she hasn't really made the most of her college experience, so her goal is to go overseas and really make the most of this semester and just like travel and fall in love and make new friends and do all that sort of stuff. And so she goes and does that, and honestly it starts off really well. She meets this boy, she makes all these friends, she starts going traveling, but it just doesn't end the way that I guess she envisioned it to end. Something goes wrong and she just doesn't quite live out her dreams, I guess. But then the book jumps forward, and I don't want to give too much away, but she basically gets a redo. She gets the opportunity to go back and kind of live out the dream that she initially intended to live out. And so you kind of get to see what she would have done differently and kind of redoing those things that she may have regretted. And it was interesting. It was just really cringy to me. The romance itself just felt a bit like, I don't want to say childish. It wasn't childish, but it just felt very like almost surface level. And I really did like certain aspects of it. I really liked how she kind of found herself and really found who she wanted to be and stuck with that and made these changes and fixed all these regrets and stuff like that. But the romance itself wasn't super interesting to me. I also just didn't find the story that interesting overall, and I don't really know why. I just think it wasn't for me. But it is also one of those books that I can imagine some people falling in love with, and I think if you just kind of see yourself in the main character or relate to her a little bit more, you could definitely just absolutely love this story. But I just didn't get attached to the story or the characters as much as I wish I did, so it was a 3-star read. It was good, it just wasn't anything crazy to me. The next book that I picked up was One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I'm slowly getting through her backlist of books, but I love this. This was a 5-star read for me, which I was kind of shocked about. I didn't expect to love it as much as I did. It is definitely a heart-wrenching story. I truly think that Taylor Jenkins Reid is one of my favorite storytellers of all time. The concepts that she creates in her stories are absolutely phenomenal, and the characters that she creates I always love. There's always at least one character that I absolutely adore. And I just think she has a gift for writing, I'm not gonna lie. For those of you who don't know, she is also the author of The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, Daisy Jones and the Six, and Malibu Rising, which are probably her 3 most well-known novels. But she has a few other novels, including this one, which are slowly kind of coming into the spotlight, I guess, now that everyone's read her other ones. But from what I'd heard, a lot of people just like don't love them as much as they loved Evelyn Hugo, Daisy Jones, etc. And I'm not gonna lie, I do think that her little Hollywood companion series is truly elite. Like, I don't think there will ever be another story of hers thrillers that she will write that will top that little companion series that she has going on there. But in saying that, I really, really liked this. It will probably make you cry. A very brief synopsis of this one: we have Emma, who meets this boy in high school, falls in love. They have a very exciting and spontaneous and love-filled relationship. And I think they're together for, I think, about a decade. And then the day before their wedding anniversary, he flies out to do a job. So he's flying out somewhere, and then he has to get on a helicopter to get to his destination, and that helicopter ends up going down. I promise I'm not ruining the story. You find this out very early on in the novel. But yeah, the helicopter ends up going down. There are no survivors, and obviously he doesn't come home. So Emma goes through a really huge grieving process, and I really appreciated how this book discussed that. It was a very moving portion of the story, I'm not gonna lie. Like I think TJR did a great job at just describing the grief and the mourning that Emma went through of her husband. But then obviously she does pick up her life and is kind of like, okay, well, what do I want my life to be like now? Like, what do I want to do with myself, with my life? And she starts to make steps toward kind of just rebuilding her life. And in the process, she meets a new guy, but they end up falling in love, and they also end up getting engaged, and it's really beautiful to watch that kind of flourishing love story. And then I think a few months after they got engaged, Emma gets a phone call, and it's her first husband, and he's alive. And it turns out that he did survive the helicopter crash, and he has basically just been surviving since then and has finally been rescued, and it's time for him to come home. And now Emma is like, what the heck do I do? Like, my husband, who I thought was dead and who was my first love, is now walking back into my life, but I've kind of moved on from that part of my life and created like almost like a brand new life for myself. And it is just so interesting watching her process all of those thoughts and emotions that come along with that. I cannot imagine having to deal with that kind of situation. Obviously, it is a very unrealistic and very rare situation, I guess. And I will say that aspects of the story were very unrealistic. Like, there were some things where you're like, this just wouldn't happen in real life, or these things like aren't really adding up, but you kind of like let it slide, and if you don't focus on the ideas of it being realistic too much, you can really just like get into the story and enjoy the characters a lot more. But yeah, I just really enjoyed this. It was really interesting to see who she ended up choosing in the end, which love she ends up going to in the end. Honestly, I think she made the right decision, but I would love to hear your thoughts if you have read this, and if you disagreed with the ending, I would love to hear your thoughts as to why. But yeah, it was a beautiful story. There's so much more than just a romance, and I think that's one of the reasons I loved it so much. I love a romance with a lot of emotional depth and a really great plot, so this kind of had everything that I loved. Moving on to Thrive by Krista and Becca Ritchie. This is the 6th book in the Addicted/Calloway Sisters series. I think I've mentioned this before, but I'm really trying to spread out this series because I really, really enjoy it, but I think I would get sick of it if I just read it all back to back. I'm really enjoying just spreading it out, probably reading like one a month. I feel like this series is just all over the internet now. I'd be surprised if you haven't heard anything about it. It's really hard to explain because there's just so much in this series. I personally really like it, and I would recommend it, but like look into what it's about before you pick it up, because I don't think it would be everyone's cup of tea. My favorite parts about it is just kind of the found family aspect of it, and just the friendship group, like the characters, you just fall in love with them and you feel like you're kind of a part of their friendship group. It's one of those books that I always find myself picking up when I'm feeling a little bit lonely. So I personally really like it. I did enjoy this book, but it's not as good as some of the other ones in the series because each book is from a different couple's perspective. Because of that, this one ended up being a little bit repetitive because it talked about situations that had happened in the previous 2 books, but from Lily and Lo's perspective, but they still had to talk about the things that had happened previously in the other books because otherwise it wouldn't have made sense. Like, it's kind of complicated, but there was a lot of repetition in this one, so it wasn't my favorite because it was kind of like, we already know what's happening here. However, I think when I pick up the next book, it'll be super interesting because there was some wild stuff that happened in this book and the past 2 books of the Calloway Sisters series. So I'm really interested to see where that kind of leads us into the next part of the story. Next we have Ace of Spades, and this was another 5-star read for me. I really, really, really enjoyed this. This one was really popular last year, so I wouldn't be surprised if you've heard a lot about it or you've already read it yourselves. I'm a bit late hopping on the bandwagon, but I'm glad that I did because it was such an incredible read. Basically, we have this high school situation and there are 2 students who start getting targeted by aces, which is an anonymous texter, I guess, who's basically like Gossip Girl, is like spreading rumors and sharing secrets about these 2 characters. And these 2 kids are obviously trying to figure out what the heck is going on and why they are being targeted. They're not really quite sure what the go is. and it's really interesting. Like the storyline itself is like wild. Like once you start getting to the end and things start getting revealed, it is just so intense. The only things that I didn't love, but again, this is like personal preference, is it read a little bit young, and obviously as a 23-year-old, maybe I just shouldn't be reading YA, but I really love YA, I'm not gonna lie. Like I find YA books some of my favorites, but it just felt very YA in terms of how it was written. And also I think this is crazy because this is the author's debut novel, so I'm very intrigued to see what else they bring out, and I cannot wait to read their future books, because if this is their debut, I just like can't imagine where they're gonna go from here. So love this. And lastly, for the physical books, we have It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. And I have so many thoughts about this book. I picked this up because I just heard so many reviews about this, and so many people raving about this. I would say it's probably one of the most hyped up books on BookTok especially. It's one of the like cult favorites over on BookTok, and I feel like Tessa Bailey as an author has kind of popped off on BookTok especially. And yeah, I've just seen so many people rave about it and love it, and a lot of people who don't usually love a lot of romance have seemed to really enjoy this. And I'm kind of conflicted. I probably would give it 3 stars. And that is because I enjoyed it, but I really did not love it. Like I definitely don't see it as a 5-star read. And obviously that's just personal preference. It is one of those books where I can see why some people would absolutely love it, but it just wasn't for me. I honestly just don't think Tessa Bailey is the author for me. I don't think I love her writing. I don't think I love how she does romance. It's just not my style. If you don't know what this one is about, it is really similar to The Simple Wild in terms of like storyline. Basically, we have a very privileged socialite young lady living in LA, and she just like parties and doesn't really have a job and doesn't really like do anything. And so her stepdad decides to kind of cut her off, basically sends her away to this small fishing town, which makes sense as to why he does it in this book. Like if you read it, you'll find out why he sends her there. And he kind of is like, you need to live there for the summer and kind of like do something with yourself and like figure out what you want to do with your life. And so she goes there, and her little sister actually comes with her. And I really like the dynamic between the two sisters. I really enjoyed reading about their kind of like friendship and all of the things that they got up to. So that was a part of the story that I really loved. And even the whole premise of the story, like the plot itself, I really enjoyed that. But obviously she goes to this fishing town. Of course she meets a guy. It's very Grumpy Sunshine vibes. The guy is super like rough and tough and like, I don't like smiling and like I build things and like, I don't know, not my vibe. Can you tell I didn't love this? A lot of people love the guy in this book. And then obviously the girl is super like sunshine and like, I wear lots of makeup and high heels even when it's not appropriate. Classic like The Simple Wild kind of vibes. And obviously they fall in love. Obviously, like what else is going to happen? But of course it comes to the end and they're like, well, what am I going to do? Do I go back to LA or do I stay here with the man that I've fallen in love with? You know, it's just like, it's just the most predictable storyline ever, which obviously I'm not a huge fan of. I just like need something more than that, I think. That's kind of the storyline. I feel like that's not going to convince anyone to read it. I think if you love The Simple Wild, you would love this, or if you love this, you'll probably love The Simple Wild if you haven't read that. Like I said, there were aspects of this story that I really did enjoy. I really enjoyed the sibling dynamic between the main character and her sister. I really liked the whole idea of you need to go and figure out what you're doing with your life. You need to kind of just do something for yourself and stop kind of living to party. Like just seeing her growth, like the character development in this book was really great. And so I enjoyed that aspect of it. But the romance itself, I was honestly just uninterested in. One thing that I think kind of like threw me off at the start, and then obviously I like just couldn't find myself falling back in love with it, was that at the beginning, the main character and her love interest really don't like each other. Classic, like that happens in a lot of different romances. But what I found frustrating was that the love interest, like the guy in the story, he seemed so annoyed and frustrated at the main character and everything to do with her demeanor and her character. And the only positive things he had to say about her were her physical attributes. Like he was like, I hate her so much, but she has such a good body. And it was just like, I don't care. Like, I don't want to read about that. Like, that is not making me like you. Like, the fact that you think her character is so annoying to you, but you like her body, that just sounds like you don't have any options in your little fishing town and you're kind of just like going for the first like woman that walks into your town that fits societal beauty standards. I don't know, there's just so much that I have to say about this, and it just wasn't for me. But I also understand that a lot of people love this, and I can see aspects of why you would love this, so I'm not trying to like kill your vibe, but I just don't think it was for me, and I just don't think Tessa Bailey is for me. It seems like a lot of her novels are very lust driven, and I just need emotional depth. I just need it, and this had that a little bit like sprinkled in there, but just wasn't enough for me. So I'm gonna give it a 3 stars. Please don't kill me. Moving on to the ebooks that I read. The first one that I read was Evidence of the Affair by Jenkins Reid. This is actually a novella by TJR, and I had never even heard about it until one of you messaged me and let me know on my book Instagram. You're like, you need to read this. It's like a little novella, super short, but super interesting, and I really enjoyed it. I ended up giving it 3 stars, but most novellas I find hard to give much more than 3 stars to, because they are so short that it's hard to really get super invested. And I really enjoyed this one. It's basically about a man and a woman who both have spouses, like married to different people, but their spouses are cheating on them with each other. It's kind of complicated to explain. And so the spouses that are not having the affair start writing letters to each other. And it's really interesting. I probably won't explain much more than that because it's a short story in itself and I don't want to give too much away. And the ending has like a tiny little plot twist in there which you just wouldn't see coming, and I love that. So definitely recommend that. Then I read The Last I don't know how to say this. Mrs. Parrish. I honestly was a little bit disappointed in this. I ended up giving it a 3 stars. I thought it would be like a 5-star read for me, and it just wasn't. I've spoken to a few people about it who really, really loved it, and I kind of came to the conclusion that I think I've just read too many other books that were too similar to this book. So it seemed extremely predictable to me, whereas if I had read this book before reading the other similar ones, I would have probably really enjoyed it. So the ones that I found very similar were The Arrangement by Robin Harding and The Wife Between Us by 2 authors that I forget the name of. But yeah, I think because of that, it just came across really predictable to me. I just didn't love the characters. They're all like super unlikable, which is kind of the point, but it just made it hard to really care about the story when you're already finding it very predictable and then the characters don't make you want to keep reading. So for those reasons, it's a 3-star read for me, but I can see why people love it, especially if you haven't read other thrillers that are super similar. The next book that I read was Layla by Colleen Hoover, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. I really, really enjoyed this. It is super different from a lot of her other novels. I'm sure most of you know by now, but Colleen Hoover writes a lot of romance. She does have a few thrillers, but this one is also a little bit different from those because it's like a thriller kind of, but it's like a supernatural mystery thriller. So super creepy vibes. It really creeped me out at the start before you really kind of knew what was going on, but then when you got a little bit further and it was explained a little bit more, it wasn't scary at all anymore to me. Basically, there's a guy, he falls in love with Layla. They have a little romance going on, and then there is an accident where Layla ends up getting a little bit of brain damage, and I don't think I'm ruining anything, by the way. This happens very early on in the book. Ends up getting a bit of brain damage, and she just like isn't her normal self after that point. And so kind of in the hopes to get her old personality back and just kind of get their romance back and get their normal life back, the guy in the story arranges a trip for them to go on. And so they go on this trip and all these weird like supernatural things start happening, but they figure out kind of why it's happening and how it happens, and then they have to kind of do something to make it end. I feel like I'm explaining this really badly and kind of like trying to sound mysterious. I'm not trying to sound mysterious, I just don't want to give away the storyline and the plot, but it's really good. I really enjoyed it. Just don't go into it expecting it to be like a sappy love story, because yes, there's romance involved, but it's definitely not the main aspect of the story. So there's my thoughts on Layla. The next book that I read was How the King of I never know how to say this. Elfhame? How the King of Elfhame Learned to Love Stories by Holly Black. For those of you who don't know, this is a novella that is linked to the Folk of the Air series, which is like the Cruel Prince trilogy. So I definitely wouldn't recommend reading this unless you've already read the 3 books from the Cruel Prince, because it's a little bit difficult to explain, but it kind of is a mix between a prequel and a sequel. It kind of starts off from where the Cruel Prince trilogy ends. Like, you kind of see Jude and Cardan's story continue a little bit, but you also get insight into Cardan's childhood and him growing up, which is super interesting. And also the whole thing is from Cardan's perspective, whereas the entire Folk of the Air series is obviously Jude's perspective. So it's really interesting to get inside Cardan's head and see how his thoughts work and how he kind of processes things. And I love that series. You guys know, like I love The Cruel Prince, I love the characters, love the storyline, and so like anything that I can get that is to do with that storyline, like I will read it. And then I also found out that there's another novella within that series, and it's called The Lost Sisters, and this one is from Taryn's perspective, which is Jude's twin sister. But you get to see what Taryn was kind of doing and what she was feeling throughout all of like probably the first, maybe the second book as well, because obviously in The Cruel Prince you're only reading through Jude's perspective. And also in The Cruel Prince, Taryn does a lot of things that you as a reader are kind of like, why is she doing that? Like, she's a bad sister and like all these sort of things. But now in this novella, you can see why she made those decisions, and it's really, really good. So if you love The Cruel Prince and you just want kind of more of that world and more of those characters, I definitely recommend both of those novellas. It's just that sense of like familiarity, coming back to a world that you really loved. So I would love her to add more novellas or even just more novels to that series. I don't think she will, but Holy Black, if you're listening, which I know you're not, but if you are, please give me more Jude and Cardan. Like, that's all I want. And that's it. I didn't realize that was the last book I read. I feel like I've been talking forever. My throat literally hurts, so thank you for sticking around if you've watched this entire video. In terms of what I plan to read in March, like March TBR, I might end up posting a little photo on my reading Instagram with what my TBR is. At this point, I have no idea. The only plan that I have for March is to read as much of my physical TBR as I possibly can, because there are still a lot of books on my bookshelf that I have not read. I'm putting myself on a book buying ban because I don't need any more books, and my birthday is in like a month, and so I think I'm just gonna request books for my birthday, so there's no point buying them now if I'm gonna probably end up receiving a few, hopefully, fingers crossed. And also I want to get through as much of my physical TBR as possible, because if I end up getting a Kindle for my birthday, I will probably be fairly obsessed with that for a little while. So that's the goal for March. Let's try and get through as much of my physical TBR as possible. But alas, I hope you enjoyed this video. I had so much fun filming it. I always love chatting to you guys about books, of course. I can't believe we're another month down. So far I've read 21 books in 2022, which means I am on track to hit my reading goal if I continue at this pace, which is great. So of course I'll keep you guys updated. Feel free to check in with my reading Instagram if you want more real-time updates with what I'm reading. I'm going to try and post more reviews on there as well, because I haven't really done that at this point, but that's a goal. But I'm gonna stop talking. So feel free to leave me a comment letting me know what you read in February. I would love to hear. Let me know your thoughts, or maybe what you plan to read in March. Again, I would love to know. Maybe you can help inspire my TBR. But I love you guys, and I will see you in my next video very soon. Goodbye.